Laughter erupted the instant the glass left Tiffany Monroe's hand. Ice-cold Coke splashed across Eleanor Hayes from head to toe, drenching her white shirt, soaking her apron, and dripping from loose strands of chestnut hair that clung to her cheeks. The restaurant seemed to freeze around her. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Conversations died in unfinished sentences. Even the piano player in the corner missed a note. For one endless moment, no one moved. Then Tiffany lifted her phone higher, smiling brightly into the live stream. "Oops," she giggled to thousands of viewers. "Looks like someone needs a diet and a towel." Her friends burst into hysterical laughter. Comments flooded the screen faster than she could read them. "Best prank ever." "She's too slow to dodge it. This is comedy gold." Brandon Pierce leaned back in his chair, applauding as though he had just witnessed a stage performance. "I told you she'd just stand there." More laughter. Someone at another table quietly looked away. Someone else reached for a napkin but hesitated. Nobody wanted to become the next target. Eleanor closed her eyes for a brief second. The Coke was freezing against her skin, but the cold barely registered. Humiliation had its own temperature. She slowly untied her soaked apron, folded it carefully, placed it over one arm. Then she looked directly into Tiffany's phone. Her voice remained calm, almost gentle. "I hope you're ready to explain this to my husband." The room exploded with laughter. A heavy-set businessman nearly choked on his drink. A young couple exchanged amused looks. Even the restaurant manager sighed in frustration, assuming Eleanor had finally snapped under pressure. "A husband?" Brandon laughed. "What is he going to do? Sue us?" Tiffany zoomed the camera closer to Eleanor's face. "Tell him to watch the live stream." Another wave of laughter echoed through the dining room. No one believed her. No one knew that the man she had just mentioned wasn't an ordinary husband. He was Matteo Ricci. The man whose name powerful businessmen whispered only behind closed doors. The man who controlled shipping ports, casinos, freight companies, and enough influence to decide which corporations thrived and which quietly disappeared. And at that very moment, he had no idea his wife was standing alone beneath hundreds of laughing eyes. 6 months earlier, the wedding had taken place before sunrise. No reporters, no photographers, no orchestra. Just 4 witnesses inside a quiet stone chapel overlooking the Atlantic. Matteo Ricci wore a charcoal suit without a single security pin or family crest. For one morning, he wanted to look less like the head of the Ricci syndicate, and more like the man Eleanor had fallen in love with. She arrived wearing an ivory dress she had found in a small bridal boutique. It wasn't custom-made. It wasn't expensive. When Matteo quietly asked why she hadn't chosen something grander, she smiled. "I want to remember how this feels, not how much it cost." That answer stayed with him longer than any wedding vow. The priest completed the ceremony in less than 20 minutes. No headlines announced the marriage. No public records revealed the groom's true position. Only Matteo's attorney, the family physician, and 2 trusted capos knew the truth. To everyone else, the most feared mafia boss on the East Coast remained unmarried. It had been Eleanor's idea. "I don't want people smiling at me because they're afraid of you." She had held both of Matteo's hands as she spoke. "I want people to respect me for who I am." He understood immediately. Or at least, he tried to, because every instinct inside him rebelled against hiding the woman he loved. He had spent years building an empire where loyalty meant survival. Now the only person he truly wanted beside him insisted on remaining invisible. "You know life will be harder," he warned. She nodded. "I've lived a hard life before. I survived it without your name. I'll survive it with your love." There were very few moments in Matteo Ricci's life when words failed him. That was one of them. Instead, he kissed her forehead, then made only one request. "If anyone truly hurts you," his voice became quieter, Promise you'll tell me. Eleanor smiled. Only if you promise not to destroy half the city. For the first time in weeks, the feared mafia boss laughed. It was genuine, warm, almost boyish. I'll try. She narrowed her eyes playfully. No, you'll promise. He pretended to consider the impossible. Finally, I promise. Neither of them realized how difficult that promise would become. Life settled into a rhythm few people could have imagined. Every morning, Eleanor drove herself to Bellissimo Trattoria, the family-owned Italian restaurant where she had worked for nearly 5 years. She carried heavy trays, memorized regular customers' favorite meals, stayed late whenever another server called in sick. Most of her co-workers knew she had recently married. None knew to whom. Whenever anyone asked what her husband did for a living, she answered honestly. He's in logistics. The answer was technically true. It simply left out the part where thousands of employees, executives, and politicians depended on those logistics. Meanwhile, across the city, Matteo attended board meetings surrounded by attorneys, investors, and men who feared disappointing him more than losing millions of dollars. He negotiated international shipping contracts before noon, settled disputes between rival organizations before dinner, reviewed intelligence reports before bed. Yet every afternoon, without fail, he texted Eleanor exactly once. "Have you eaten?" She always answered, "Only if you have." His assistants found the exchange amusing. His capos pretended not to notice, but everyone close enough to witness those messages understood something remarkable. The only person capable of giving orders to Matteo Ricci was the woman who still wore a waitress's apron. Friday evenings at Bellissimo Trattoria were always chaotic. By 6 o'clock, every table was occupied. Families celebrated birthdays beneath strings of warm lights. Business executives discussed contracts over expensive wine. Couples lingered over handmade pasta, while tourists crowded the entrance, hoping someone would finish dinner early. For Eleanor Hayes, Friday meant one thing: keep moving. She balanced 3 steaming plates across one arm, while carrying a basket of fresh bread in the other. Despite her size, she moved with surprising grace. Years of carrying heavy trays had taught her exactly how to shift her weight without spilling a single drop. "Table 12 needs another bottle of Chianti," the bartender shouted. "Coming?" Table 7 asked for extra Parmesan. "I've got it." The kitchen forgot a side salad. "I'll fix it." She answered every request with the same calm voice, never complaining, never rushing so fast that she lost control. Several regular customers smiled as she passed. One elderly couple always requested her section. "Nobody takes better care of us than Eleanor," Mrs. Lawson often said. Compliments like that mattered far more to her than generous tips. Respect couldn't be purchased. It had to be earned, exactly the way she wanted to live. She had almost forgotten the promise she'd made Matteo months earlier. "If anyone truly hurts you, tell me." She smiled to herself. There was nothing to tell. Life was ordinary, peaceful, exactly as she'd hoped. Then the restaurant doors opened. Heads turned almost immediately. Tiffany Monroe entered first. Perfect blonde hair, designer sunglasses despite the evening light, a white outfit that looked chosen specifically to stand out in photographs. Behind her walked Brandon Pierce in an expensive tailored suit, already holding his phone as if documenting every second of his own life. 3 friends followed, each carrying cameras, each speaking louder than necessary. The hostess recognized Tiffany instantly. "Welcome back, Miss Monroe." Tiffany barely acknowledged her. "We'll need your best table, the one by the window, and make sure nobody blocks the lighting." The hostess glanced nervously toward the nearly full dining room. "I'm afraid that table is occupied." Tiffany's smile disappeared. It won't be for long. 5 minutes later, an elderly anniversary couple found themselves politely asked whether they would mind moving to another table for operational reasons. They agreed without complaint. Eleanor noticed. Her stomach tightened, but she said nothing. The manager had made the decision, not her. Within minutes, Tiffany's phone was streaming live. "Happy Friday, everyone!" Thousands joined almost instantly. She spun the camera around the restaurant. "Tonight, we're trying the most famous Italian place in the city." Brandon leaned into frame. "If the service isn't perfect," he laughed, "we'll let you know." The comments poured in. "Ask the waiter something ridiculous. Rate everyone. Do a challenge." Tiffany grinned. "Oh, don't worry. We always make dinner interesting." Eleanor approached with menus. "Good evening. My name is Eleanor, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Tiffany looked up, paused, then slowly examined Eleanor from head to toe. The pause lasted only 2 seconds. But Eleanor had experienced enough judgment in her life to recognize it immediately. "So," Tiffany said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "you're our server?" "Yes, ma'am." She tilted her head. "I thought restaurants hired people who could actually move quickly." One of her friends snickered. Brandon laughed. The live stream chat exploded with laughing emojis. Eleanor smiled politely. "I'll do my best to make sure everything arrives on time." The calm response disappointed Tiffany. She had expected embarrassment. Instead, she found composure. The first 20 minutes became a series of small tests. Every few minutes, Tiffany demanded something new. More ice, less ice, a different fork, fresh napkins, a replacement glass, because this one looked wrong. Extra lemon, no lemon, another basket of bread. Then complained she hadn't touched the first one. Each request forced Eleanor to cross the crowded restaurant again. Not once did she lose patience. Not once did she answer sharply. Other servers began exchanging worried looks. "She's doing this on purpose," whispered Mia near the kitchen. "I know." "Should somebody tell the manager?" Eleanor shook her head. "It'll only make things worse." Unfortunately, she was right. The manager had already noticed Tiffany's live stream. Instead of protecting his employee, he saw opportunity. "She's got millions of followers," he whispered to the assistant manager. "If this goes well, it'll be great publicity." He never asked whether Eleanor was all right. By the time dessert menus arrived, Tiffany seemed frustrated. Nothing had worked. The waitress refused to cry, refused to argue, refused to give her the dramatic reaction that generated viral clips. Brandon leaned closer. "Babe, you're losing the audience." She glanced at the screen. Viewer numbers had started dropping. She needed something bigger, something memorable, something people would replay. Her eyes settled on the large glass of Coke beside her plate. Ice cubes floated quietly near the surface. Condensation slid down the outside of the glass. A slow smile spread across her face. "I've got an idea." Brandon immediately understood. He chuckled. "Oh, that's evil, but it'll definitely trend." One of their friends hesitated. "Maybe don't." "It's just a waitress." Tiffany shrugged. "Exactly. No one's going to care." Across the room, Eleanor returned carrying the dessert tray. Homemade tiramisu. Cannoli. Chocolate mousse. She carefully placed each dessert in front of the guests. "Can I get anyone anything else this evening?" Tiffany wrapped her fingers around the cold glass. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow. Several nearby diners noticed the movement. A little girl at the next table frowned. An older gentleman quietly lowered his newspaper. Even Brandon leaned back slightly, knowing exactly what was about to happen. Tiffany smiled directly into her live stream camera. "Hey everyone, you wanted entertainment." She lifted the glass. "Here it comes." The glass tipped. For one suspended heartbeat, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Then the entire drink crashed over Eleanor. Ice cubes struck her shoulder before bouncing onto the hardwood floor. Dark soda soaked her white blouse instantly, streamed down her apron, and pooled around her shoes. Cold liquid dripped from her hair, across her face, and onto the dessert tray still balanced in her trembling hands. A sharp gasp rippled through nearby tables. The little girl who had been watching covered her mouth. Her mother whispered softly, "Oh my goodness." Then came the laughter. Tiffany laughed first. Brandon followed. Soon their friends joined in, clapping as though the humiliation had been carefully rehearsed. Tiffany swung her phone toward Eleanor. "There! Now that's content!" The live stream exploded. Hearts. Laughing emojis. Comments scrolling faster than anyone could read. She deserved it. Best Friday stream ever. "Somebody clip this! She's crying!" Except, she wasn't. Eleanor stood perfectly still. The sting in her eyes came from the soda, not from tears. Slowly, very slowly. She placed the untouched desserts back onto the serving tray. She removed the soaked apron from around her waist, folded it with deliberate care. Every movement was controlled. Every movement denied Tiffany the reaction she wanted. When she finally looked into the phone's camera, the dining room became strangely quiet. "I hope you're ready to explain this to my husband." For half a second, silence. Then Brandon burst into laughter. "Oh, here we go. Is he 6'8"? Going to beat us up?" Tiffany smirked. "Tell him to subscribe first." More laughter echoed through the restaurant. Only Eleanor remained calm. She nodded once. "As you wish." Then she picked up the tray and walked toward the kitchen. Her back remained perfectly straight. No shouting, no insults, no revenge. Somehow, that quiet dignity made several witnesses feel far more uncomfortable than any angry outburst could have. The kitchen fell silent the moment she entered. Every cook stopped working. The dishwasher looked up from the sink. Mia rushed forward carrying clean towels. "Oh, Ellie, I'm so sorry." Eleanor accepted the towel with a grateful smile. "I'm okay." "No, you're not." "I will be." She disappeared into the employee restroom, locked the door, looked at herself in the mirror. Sticky soda covered nearly every inch of her uniform. Her mascara had begun to run slightly. A strand of wet hair rested against her cheek. For the first time all evening, her shoulders dropped. Not because of humiliation, because she was tired. Tired of pretending cruel people didn't exist. Tired of watching others stay silent, because speaking up carried consequences. She closed her eyes, took one slow breath, then another. By the time she stepped back outside, her expression had become composed once again. The restaurant manager intercepted her near the hallway. "Eleanor, you need to get back out there." She stared at him in disbelief. "You saw what happened." He sighed impatiently. "I did. They're important customers. They have a huge online audience. We can't afford a scene." "A scene?" She spoke quietly. "They poured a drink over me. I know. But they're already calming down. If you apologize, maybe they'll leave a good review." Several employees froze. No one could believe what they had just heard. Even Mia whispered, "Are you serious?" The manager ignored her. "Eleanor, I'm waiting." She looked at him for several long seconds, then asked a single question. "Will you at least preserve the security footage?" He frowned. "Why?" "I'd like a copy." Something in her calm tone unsettled him. "This doesn't have to become a legal issue." "It doesn't," she answered. "But I'd still appreciate the footage." After another uncomfortable pause, he reluctantly nodded. "I'll ask IT. Thank you. Nothing more." She didn't threaten him. She didn't argue. She simply returned to work. That decision changed the atmosphere inside the restaurant. Customers who had remained silent now watched Eleanor differently. Not with pity, with admiration. The elderly anniversary couple quietly left a $500 tip. Another table asked specifically for Eleanor to serve them instead. One businessman approached privately. "My daughter waits tables. I hope she'd handle herself half as well." Eleanor smiled. "Thank you." Across the room, Tiffany noticed something unexpected. Instead of becoming the hero of the evening, she had somehow become the villain. People were avoiding eye contact. The laughter had faded. Even her live stream comments had begun changing. That wasn't funny. She handled that with class. "You went too far." Tiffany frowned. "Whatever. They're just jealous." Brandon nodded confidently. "Tomorrow everyone will be talking about you." He was right. Everyone would be talking. Just not for the reasons either of them imagined. Nearly 2 hours later, the restaurant finally closed. Employees clocked out one by one. Eleanor changed into dry clothes she kept in her locker. Before leaving, the security supervisor quietly handed her a flash drive. "I made a copy. The manager doesn't know." She blinked in surprise. "You could get into trouble." The older man shrugged. "My wife waited tables for 30 years. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen what happened." For the first time that evening, emotion almost reached Eleanor's eyes. "Thank you." He smiled gently. "No, thank you. You reminded everyone here what dignity looks like." Outside, rain had begun falling. Eleanor sat alone inside her car, without starting the engine. Her phone buzzed. One unread message. From Mateo. "Have you eaten?" She stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She almost told him. Almost. Instead, she typed the same answer she always did. "Only if you have." Seconds later, his reply appeared. "I'm finishing a meeting. I'll be home soon." She smiled sadly, deleted the tears gathering in the corners of her eyes, started the engine, and drove home. She never noticed the live stream clip spreading across every major social media platform in the country. Nor did she realize that less than 30 miles away, inside the headquarters of Ricci Group, a junior attorney had just walked into Matteo Ricci's office, carrying a tablet with a single frozen image on its screen. The image showed Eleanor, covered in coke. By the time Eleanor reached home, the video had already escaped the restaurant. It spread across social media faster than anyone expected. Entertainment pages reposted it. Reaction channels stitched it. Anonymous accounts clipped only the moment the coke struck Eleanor, trimming away everything that happened afterward. Without context, it looked like another viral prank. Millions watched. Few questioned it. Across town, Tiffany Monroe sat inside the penthouse she shared with Brandon Pierce, refreshing her analytics every few seconds. Her grin grew wider with every update. 3 million views. She laughed. "I've never hit numbers like this." Brandon poured 2 glasses of champagne. "I told you. People love confidence. They love winners." She raised her glass. "To going viral." They clinked crystal. Neither noticed that newer comments had begun pushing back. "She stayed classier than you." "This isn't funny anymore." "Someone identify the waitress. I'd like to tip her." Tiffany rolled her eyes. "The internet gets emotional over everything." She tapped her screen again. Several sponsors had already sent congratulatory messages, believing the attention would benefit future campaigns. One marketing executive even wrote, "Brilliant engagement. Let's discuss another collaboration next week." Tiffany smiled proudly. "This just made my career." Brandon felt equally untouchable. His own phone buzzed with messages from friends. "Dude, your girlfriend is savage." "You two are legends. When's the next live stream?" He answered every message with exaggerated confidence. Tomorrow would be even better. Tomorrow morning, he would attend the most important investment meeting of his life. His father's real estate company had spent months pursuing financing from Ritchie Group Logistics. If the deal succeeded, their business would expand across the East Coast. His father had repeated the same warning countless times. Be respectful. Ritchie Group values professionalism. Brandon barely listened. As far as he knew, Ritchie Group was simply another massive corporation led by an unusually private CEO. He had never met Matteo Ritchie. Never heard the stories whispered in rooms where powerful men spoke carefully. Never understood why seasoned executives became nervous whenever the Ritchie name entered conversation. To Brandon, tomorrow promised wealth, not consequences. Less than 30 miles away, the atmosphere inside Ritchie Group headquarters felt entirely different. Most lights on the executive floor had already been switched off. Only one conference room remained occupied. A junior attorney entered cautiously, carrying a tablet. He stopped beside Matteo Ritchie. "Sir, you need to see this." Matteo looked up from a shipping contract. "What is it?" The attorney hesitated. "I think it concerns Mrs. Ritchie." The room became still. Two senior advisors immediately exchanged uneasy glances. Very few employees knew that title. Matteo accepted the tablet without speaking. The video began playing. He watched Eleanor serving desserts. He watched Tiffany smiling into the camera. He watched the glass rise. He watched the Coke crash over his wife's shoulders. No one in the room dared breathe. The recording continued. Laughter, mockery, Brandon applauding. Then Eleanor calmly folding her apron. Finally, her quiet sentence. "I hope you're ready to explain this to my husband." The laughter that followed echoed through the conference room speakers. When the video ended, Matteo placed the tablet on the table, carefully. Silently. No one had ever learned to fear Matteo because he shouted. They feared him because he didn't. "Who are they?" His voice remained perfectly level. The head of legal answered immediately. "Our investigators identified them within 30 minutes. He slid 2 folders across the table. Tiffany Monroe, social media personality. Brandon Pierce, Vice President of Pierce Development. Another advisor added, "The Pierces requested tomorrow's investment meeting 3 months ago." Matteo opened Brandon's file first. He studied every page without changing expression. Financial statements, pending contracts, political donations, outstanding loans. Finally, he closed the folder, then opened Tiffany's, brand endorsements, media appearances, corporate partnerships. Every detail quietly organized. When he finished reading, he looked toward the legal team. "What have you prepared?" The chief attorney answered cautiously. "We can file civil actions immediately." Defamation, assault, intentional emotional distress. One of the capos spoke next. His tone was colder. "There are other options." Several men around the table nodded. No explanation was necessary. Everyone understood exactly what he meant. For years, enemies of the Ritchie syndicate had disappeared from boardrooms, businesses, and sometimes from public life entirely. No questions asked. No evidence left behind. The room waited. Matteo remained silent for nearly a full minute. Then, he closed both folders. No. Confused expressions spread around the table. The capo frowned. "Boss?" Matteo looked directly at him. "I gave my wife my word." Another long silence followed. "If I break that promise, I become the man she never wanted to marry." No one argued, because every person present knew something the outside world never would. Eleanor Hayes had changed Matteo Ritchie, not by making him weaker, by giving him something more difficult than power. Restraint. The chief attorney cleared his throat. "What are your instructions?" Matteo stood. He picked up a single sheet of paper from the printer. It was a high-resolution photograph taken from the viral video. Eleanor, standing quietly, covered in coke. He folded the photograph once, placed it inside a leather portfolio, then buttoned his jacket. "I'll handle this myself." No one offered another suggestion, because when Matteo Ricci spoke in that voice, the decision had already been made. At the exact same moment, Brandon received an email confirming tomorrow's schedule. 9 a.m., Ricci Group Headquarters, final investment approval meeting. He smiled confidently. This is it. Tiffany kissed him on the cheek. Tomorrow, we celebrate twice. Neither of them realized that the man waiting inside that boardroom had already watched every second of the live stream, and resting inside his leather portfolio was a photograph they would recognize the instant he placed it on the conference table. The Ricci Group headquarters occupied an entire city block. 40 stories of polished glass overlooked the harbor Matteo had quietly controlled for more than a decade. Every executive who entered the building understood one rule: punctuality wasn't appreciated. It was expected. At precisely 8:55 a.m., Brandon Pierce stepped through the revolving doors, wearing his most expensive navy suit. Beside him, Tiffany Monroe adjusted the designer handbag resting on her shoulder. She wasn't scheduled to attend the investment meeting, but Brandon had insisted. "If this deal closes," he told her, "everyone should know who we're celebrating with." The receptionist greeted them politely before escorting them to the executive boardroom. Neither noticed how unusually quiet the floor seemed. No assistants chatted outside their offices. No executives lingered near the coffee station. Even security personnel stood straighter than usual. The atmosphere felt less like a corporate headquarters and more like a courtroom moments before a verdict. Inside the boardroom, 12 executives were already seated: financial analysts, corporate attorneys, division presidents. Every chair faced the polished walnut table, stretching nearly 30 feet across the room. Brandon recognized several influential names immediately. He smiled confidently as handshakes were exchanged. "This is a tremendous opportunity. We're looking forward to building a long-term partnership." Most answered with polite nods. Very few smiled. Tiffany quietly looked around. "Where's Mr. Ricci?" One executive checked his watch. "He'll be here shortly." Something about his tone made Brandon pause. Not nervous, respectful, almost cautious. At exactly 9 o'clock, the boardroom doors opened. Conversation stopped instantly. Matteo Ricci entered without an entourage. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, a simple silver watch, and an expression impossible to read. No dramatic entrance. No raised voice. He acknowledged no one as he walked toward the head of the table. Only after taking his seat did he glance around the room. "Good morning." Every executive answered in unison. "Good morning, Mr. Ricci." Brandon extended his hand across the table. "Pleasure to finally meet you, sir." Matteo looked briefly at the offered hand, then at Brandon. He made no move to shake it. After several awkward seconds, Brandon slowly lowered his arm. A subtle discomfort spread through the room. Without speaking, Matteo opened the leather portfolio resting beside him. Everyone expected contracts, financial projections, perhaps acquisition documents. Instead, he removed a single photograph, printed on thick archival paper. He placed it carefully in the center of the table. The image faced Brandon and Tiffany. Their smiles disappeared. It showed Eleanor, standing inside Bellissimo Trattoria, her uniform soaked with coke, her hair dripping, her expression calm despite the humiliation surrounding her. The room became so quiet that the ticking of a wall clock suddenly seemed loud. No one understood why that photograph had replaced the meeting agenda. Only Matteo knew. He folded his hands calmly, then asked one question. "Would either of you like to explain?" His eyes settled first on Brandon, then Tiffany. "Why my wife was crying herself to sleep last night." No one answered. For several seconds, neither Brandon nor Tiffany seemed capable of understanding the sentence they had just heard. Finally, Brandon laughed nervously. "I'm sorry. I think there's been some misunderstanding." Matteo remained silent. Brandon pointed uncertainly toward the photograph. That's the waitress from yesterday." "Yes?" Matteo's reply was immediate. "My wife." The words landed like thunder. One executive slowly removed his glasses. Another lowered his pen. Across the table, the chief legal officer quietly closed the folder he had been preparing to discuss. Nothing inside it mattered anymore. Tiffany stared at the photograph, then back at Matteo. "No," she whispered. "That's impossible." "It isn't." Brandon felt the blood drain from his face. His father had warned him many times that Matteo Ricci valued loyalty above profit. But no one had ever mentioned a wife. He looked desperately toward the executives surrounding the table. Instead of surprise, most wore expressions of quiet understanding, as though they had just witnessed the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. One elderly board member finally spoke. "So, it was Mrs. Ricci." Another executive nodded slowly. "That explains everything." Brandon frowned. "What does that mean?" No one answered him. They didn't need to. The silence itself became an answer. Tiffany forced herself to speak. It was just a joke." She attempted a small laugh. "My audience expects comedy. We never meant to actually hurt her." Matteo regarded her for several long seconds. "When my wife came home," he said quietly, "she told me she'd had a long shift. She didn't mention your names. She didn't ask me to solve her problems." His voice never rose. "She was trying to protect you." That sentence unsettled everyone more than anger would have, because it revealed something none of them expected. Eleanor had chosen mercy. Before Matteo had even known who deserved it, Brandon suddenly leaned forward. "Sir, I had nothing to do with the drink. I didn't pour it. It was Tiffany." Tiffany whipped around. "What? You were laughing. You told me it'd go viral. You encouraged it." Brandon shook his head frantically. "You picked up the glass. I never touched her." Within seconds, the couple who had celebrated together the previous evening began blaming each other across the conference table. Every accusation sounded louder than the last. Every excuse revealed another layer of selfishness. Matteo watched in silence. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. People often revealed their true character once fear entered the room. Finally, he raised one hand. Instant silence returned. "I've heard enough." Brandon swallowed hard. "Please. My father spent months arranging this meeting." "I know," Matteo answered. "I also know exactly how much your family needs this partnership." He opened another folder. Inside were the Pierce development contracts. Already prepared. Already reviewed. Already ready for signature. Matteo picked up a fountain pen. Then, very deliberately, he closed the folder again. Without signing a single page, Brandon's face turned pale. He suddenly understood. The meeting was over, and the consequences were only beginning. The silence lingered after Matteo closed the contract folder. Brandon's heartbeat pounded so loudly, he was certain everyone in the boardroom could hear it. He swallowed. "Mr. Ricci, please. My father doesn't even know about what happened. This shouldn't affect our business." Matteo looked at him without anger. "Business," he repeated quietly, "is built on judgment. If someone lacks the judgment to respect a stranger with no power," he paused, "how can I trust that person with millions of dollars?" No one challenged the logic. Several executives lowered their eyes. They had negotiated with Matteo for years. They knew he rarely spoke more than necessary. When he did, every sentence became a decision. Matteo slowly stood. "I won't ruin your lives." Relief flashed across Brandon's face. Then Matteo continued, "But neither will I reward your character." He slid the unsigned contract back toward the legal department. "Effective immediately. Ricci Group will terminate all negotiations with Pierce Development. Current supplier agreements will conclude according to law. No renewals. No future investments. No strategic partnerships." The chief legal officer nodded once. "It will be done." Brandon's shoulders collapsed. Months of negotiations, years of planning, gone in less than 60 seconds. Not because of market conditions, not because of financial risk. Because he had laughed, while another human being was humiliated. Tiffany could feel her carefully built public image slipping away. She leaned forward desperately. "I'll apologize. I'll post a video. I'll delete the live stream. It'll disappear." Matteo regarded her calmly. "The internet rarely forgets. Neither should we." His voice softened. "But people can learn. If your apology is sincere, give it because it's right, not because your sponsors expect it." Tiffany had no answer. For perhaps the first time in years, she realized influence could not erase consequences. As Brandon and Tiffany were escorted from the boardroom, no one celebrated. There was no applause, no triumphant speeches, only quiet professionalism. One executive finally asked, "Should we issue a press release?" Matteo shook his head. "No, this isn't about embarrassing them. It's about protecting people like my wife." He turned toward his legal team. "I want a foundation established immediately." The attorneys opened their notebooks. "It will provide legal assistance for hospitality workers who experience workplace abuse, public humiliation, or online harassment." He paused before adding one final instruction. "Name it after Eleanor." The chief attorney smiled slightly. "Should we identify her publicly?" Matteo looked toward the harbor outside the glass windows. "No, not yet. That choice belongs to her." That evening, Eleanor waited at home, with dinner warming gently in the oven. When Matteo arrived, she immediately noticed something different. Not anger, peace. "You found out," she said softly. He nodded. "I watched the video." She looked down. "I'm sorry." He stepped closer. "The only person who deserves an apology is you." For several moments neither spoke. Then Eleanor reached for his hand. "You promised." "I remember." "You didn't hurt them." "No." She searched his face carefully. "You really didn't." He smiled for the first time that day. "I protected my wife, without becoming someone she'd be ashamed of." Tears finally reached Eleanor's eyes. Not from pain. From relief. She wrapped her arms around him. "You kept your promise." He rested his forehead against hers. "You taught me how." The following weeks transformed lives in ways no one expected. Sponsors quietly ended contracts with Tiffany Monroe, not because she had lost followers. Ironically, her audience continued growing, but companies no longer wanted their brands associated with public cruelty. Several longtime friends distanced themselves. Interview invitations disappeared. The attention she had once celebrated became a daily reminder of a single terrible decision. Eventually, she released a public apology. There were no dramatic tears, no excuses, only a simple admission. "I confused humiliation with entertainment. It was wrong. Some people accepted it. Others never would." That was no longer hers to decide. Meanwhile, the Eleanor Hospitality Foundation quietly began helping restaurant employees across the state. Waiters, bartenders, hotel housekeepers. young servers facing harassment from difficult customers, legal advice, counseling, emergency financial support. Hundreds received assistance within the first few months. Very few knew who had inspired it. That anonymity pleased Eleanor. She had never wanted recognition, only fairness. Several months later, the city hosted its annual community service gala. Business leaders, judges, teachers, police officers, restaurant owners. Hundreds gathered to celebrate people whose quiet work strengthened the community. Eleanor believed she had simply been invited as a guest speaker, representing hospitality workers. She stood backstage, nervously reviewing her note cards. Then, an organizer approached. "Mrs. Hayes, there's been a small change. You'll be introduced by Mr. Matteo Ricci." She blinked. "He never told me he was coming." The organizer smiled knowingly. "I don't believe he wanted to." The ballroom lights dimmed. Matteo walked onto the stage. The audience applauded politely. Most expected another speech about philanthropy or business leadership. Instead, he looked toward the wings where Eleanor waited, then spoke quietly into the microphone. For many years, people believed strength came from wealth, influence, or fear. He paused. "I learned otherwise." He extended one hand. "Eleanor, would you join me?" Confused applause filled the room as Eleanor stepped onto the stage. Matteo turned toward the audience. Then, for the first time in public, he took her hand. "I'd like you to meet my wife." A wave of astonishment swept through the ballroom. Business executives exchanged stunned looks. Community leaders whispered to one another. Several former Bellissimo employees gasped openly. Even the restaurant manager, seated near the back, slowly lowered his head. Matteo continued, "The strongest person in my life isn't respected because of power." He looked at Eleanor with unmistakable pride. "She's respected because she chose dignity. When the world offered humiliation, for one long heartbeat, no one moved. Then the entire ballroom rose to its feet. The standing ovation seemed endless." Eleanor looked around in disbelief. Many of her former co-workers wiped tears from their eyes. Even the elderly couple she had served every Friday smiled proudly from the front row. Months later, Bellissimo Trattoria looked much the same. The same warm lights, the same smell of fresh bread, the same piano in the corner. Only one thing had changed. Eleanor no longer arrived wearing an apron. She came as a guest. The staff greeted her like family. Even the former manager approached quietly. "I failed you. I've regretted it every day." Eleanor smiled gently. "I hope you've learned from it." "I have." She nodded. "Then that's enough." Forgiveness did not erase the past, but it allowed better choices in the future. As she prepared to leave, a young waitress hurried over. "Mrs. Ricci," she asked shyly, "if you were already married to the most powerful man in the city, why did you keep working here?" Eleanor glanced toward the entrance where Matteo waited patiently, hands in his coat pockets, smiling only for her. She smiled back. "Because if I had never worn that apron," she reached for Matteo's hand, "I would never have learned that real respect isn't something power gives you. It's something character earns." Together, they walked into the evening, not as a feared mafia boss rescuing his wife, but as a husband proudly walking beside the woman who had reminded an entire city. That dignity will always outlast humiliation.